While a thesis statement in a literary essay does function a little bit differently than a thesis in other kinds of argumentative writing, like a pro, con, or opinion-based essay, it's important to notice that the overall structure of an argumentative essay doesn't change much, regardless of the subject. In other words, most essays that present an argument or interpretation operate basically the same way. They're made up of the same pieces. And regardless of what you call those pieces of the essay, they're all there to do a job, and they all exist in relation to one another. So, on a very general level, most essays are built the same, regardless of the exact content. This means that while writing effectively about literature does have its own unique aspects, the truth is that effective writing is just effective writing, whether it's about a short story, a play, or climate change. Having a good sense of how argumentative writing works, and knowing the pieces that you need to construct a good essay, obviously makes writing a lot easier. But this knowledge doesn't help with just the writing part of the writing process, though that's an obvious benefit. Understanding essay basics also helps you to read and research more effectively. And as soon as you get a writing assignment, if you have a good grasp on how to put an essay together, you can begin to visualize writing possibilities immediately. You can see the essay before it's even written, at least in its basic framework. Now, we don't want to get too mechanical about the whole process, but there's really no denying that argumentative essays need certain pieces in place to function well, regardless of the subject matter. And you can get in the habit of imagining those essay pieces and how they'll fit together in a pretty predictable way. This is one reason that good writers can write effectively about any topic. It's not the topic that they necessarily know really well, it's basic essay structure. A useful visual device for thinking about how essays work is this simple stick figure, arms and legs outstretched. Now, we'll give them a head because we're decent folk, but it does kind of get in the way, so don't bother so much with it. This image gives you an immediate sense of the shape of an essay, or of how various pieces in an essay relate to one another, in terms of being relatively more or less specific. Note that we begin, well, at the beginning of course, with what will usually be the most general part of the essay, the start of our introduction. Here we might mention the authors and works we'll be covering, maybe a summary sentence or two, maybe we give a sense of our general topic. But we don't yet provide a narrowly focused thesis, nor are we citing evidence from the text just yet. Our introduction begins to narrow, following the stick figure's arms to our thesis statement. This could be 1 or 2 sentences, but most important here is just to note its relative specificity, or generality, depending on what you compare it to. It's more focused than our general introduction, where we might have mentioned a topic, but it also isn't a specific quotation from the text. The body of our stick figure then becomes the body of our essay. We develop paragraphs that elaborate in still more focused detail on our overall thesis. What you need to see is that everything in the body of the essay fits within the idea we lay out in the introduction. Then we reach a conclusion where we can get a little broader, though usually no more so than where we began our essay. So we don't want to begin an essay with overly general statements about life, society, history, or the universe. That's too broad. Nor should we get halfway through an essay and then mention some important life lesson that we think our reader needs to know. And finally, we shouldn't feel obliged to conclude our essay by providing our reader with a grand moral or some profound universal truth. I mean, I know our essay is important and interesting, but it isn't that important or interesting. The stick figure visual helps us to imagine the relationship of the pieces of our essay, from topic and introduction to thesis, and then to conclusion. But notice that leaves his entire body, the body of our essay, which should be most of the essay. It's just that straight line. Obviously, there's more going on in our body paragraphs than that. Here's where our stick figure is useful again, because the shape of the overall essay is also the shape of a typical body paragraph. Our stick figure visual does double duty for us. The scale just changes. From representing an entire essay, the stick figure goes to representing just one body paragraph. But his outstretched arms and legs still show how we move from the relatively general to the relatively specific, and then back to the relatively general again. But now, instead of the outstretched arms representing an entire introduction that narrows to a thesis statement, the arms represent a topic sentence for that paragraph, or maybe a topic sentence and another sentence or two that refine that topic. Then we get into the most specific part of the paragraph, the proof or support or evidence, or whatever you want to call it. Regardless of the name, it needs to do the job of convincing our reader that our topic sentence, our interpretation of the text, is valid. If we show the validity of our individual topic sentences, then hopefully we can convince our reader of the validity of our overall thesis too. The proof or evidence in a literary essay will almost always take the form of direct quotation from the primary text. If you can't find anything in the primary text to support the interpretation you've put forward, not many readers will be convinced. Of course, we might also find secondary source material in a body paragraph too. This will come from research you do based on whatever primary text you cover in the essay. Notice that research works most effectively in literary essays when it, like the evidence from your primary texts, is narrowly focused. You don't want to introduce an idea in a topic sentence, then provide evidence from the primary text, only to follow that with a quotation from a secondary source that's just about a very general idea, even if it is related to your discussion. Imagine what this would do to our poor stick figure. After presenting our evidence and taking time to explain how it proves the point we're making, and remember that you have to do this, don't leave it for your reader to figure out, we transition away from one idea and into the next. Our topic sentences will be related in an obvious way to the thesis, but if we follow the stick figure as our guide, we'll never get overly general in the middle of an essay. We don't want to take an awkward pause from our literary discussion to comment on some aspect of modern society. If such commentary goes anywhere in an essay, and that's a big if, it could maybe happen in the conclusion. Every time we begin a new body paragraph, we follow the same stick figure model. Topic sentence, maybe a refining statement or two, evidence from the text, secondary source quotations if we've done any research. We make sure that we've explained our evidence and why it shows what we want it to show. Then it's on to the next idea. Then, at some point, we'll get tired of body paragraphs and transition into our conclusion. Now we're back to the stick figure as it represents our whole essay. Our conclusion gets a little broader than the narrower ideas we've presented in the essay body, and we restate the overall idea. Then we're done. Now, of course, these are general guidelines. Your instructors may have other ideas about effective writing, and you can certainly find effective essays that don't conform to the basic stick figure idea, either on the essay or the individual body paragraph level. But you might also be surprised to find just how many essays, even if they don't seem highly organized or mechanical on the surface, do follow the fairly formulaic approach outlined here. And even when the famous author George Orwell laid out what he thought were important rules for writers to follow, his last rule was maybe the most important. He said, "Break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous."